Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. In this week's video, we're in session number 4 of our new series entitled QME Hot Topics and Pop Culture. And I'm very excited to be with you today. I have a fascinating discussion for you, one of which is one of my favorite topics to discuss, and that has to deal with apportionment, and we'll get into a lot more about that in just a very few moments here. But before we do, let's talk about where we've come from so far in this program. In session number 1, we spent a great deal of time talking about how liberal construction shapes the decision-making process in California workers' compensation to favor the delivery of benefits to persons injured in the course of their employment here in the state of California. And this is a philosophy that governs all of the workers' compensation system, and we talked at great length about that particular concept. In session number 2, we talked about a very little understood topic, meaning that qualified medical evaluators generally and as a group poorly understand the role of our prescription for return to work recommendations, how those recommendations are used in the system, and how those recommendations dictate the benefits that are delivered to and received by injured workers. So we spent a full hour talking about how you can better construct your return to work recommendations, because the return to work recommendations is a very high stakes game. And if you misstate the employee's work restrictions, that employee could be out of a job, could be unable to return to their regular job, in which case they're in a bit of trouble because benefits are limited for injured workers who cannot return to the pre-injury occupation. And we talked quite a bit about how to formulate your return to work recommendations. In our last session, we talked about how to use the Chapter 18 to provide for an additional 1%, 2%, or even 3% whole person impairment for your examinees who have an impairment and who have a standard impairment rating, but for whom the standard impairment rating does not adequately capture the limitations that their condition imposes upon their activities of daily living. So we talked about the excess pain-related impairment and when an excess pain-related impairment applies and when an excess pain-related impairment does not apply. In today's session, we're going to talk about apportionment, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about that, so we'll just introduce the topic here right now. In our next session, we're going to talk about bias and how we're now entering the new anti-bias era. And in that session, I want to plant a seed in your mind. And it's going to be just a seed now because that seed is going to take some time to germinate and develop within you. And the timing will be perfect because by the time you start to consider bias and how bias enters into your medical decision making, we will have seen the passage of the new QME regulations, which address bias in the medical legal evaluation. So our timing on this discussion is going to be perfect, and I'm very excited to bring some of these new ideas to you. And then finally, in our last session, session 6 of this program, we're going to go back to the AMA guides and we're going to go back to your QME reporting, and we're going to talk about new ideas that you can call upon to formulate your permanent impairment opinions for those cases that are not adequately addressed in the AMA guides, or that are poorly addressed in the AMA guides, or that just don't seem to you that the AMA guides provide a specific or accurate description of your examinee's true impairment. I'm going to show you some clever analogies and some creative uses of the 4 corners of the AMA guides that you may not have considered yourself. And I'm going to show you how you can capture this creativity and import this creativity into your very next evaluation. So that's the main topic headings of our new program, QME Hot Topics and Pop Culture. And today, let's turn our attention to simplifying the apportionment determination within the body of your report. And today's discussion is entitled Apportionment Simplified. Okay, so let's begin today's discussion, which is entitled Apportionment Simplified. And I want you to know I'm very excited to be with you today and discussing this particular topic, because if all of us are honest with each other, we realize that the apportionment section of our reports is the most difficult section that we encounter in the entirety of our QME report writing process. And most qualified medical evaluators hate, detest, and dread the apportionment section of the reports, because it's this particular section of the report that requires us to put on our thinking caps, to shut out all distractions, and to go into deep thought and deep concentration to pull together all of the factors that have to be considered in constructing a credible and substantial apportionment determination within the body of our reports. And it's this section of the report that most qualified medical evaluators shrink from and shirk in their report writing process, and they take great shortcuts to do whatever it takes to disguise the fact that they do a poor job in assessing all of the factors involved in coming up with a truthful and accurate description of the apportionment of the examinee's permanent impairment. So I want to simplify this greatly for you. And I want to let you know that in the industry, as far as the parties are concerned, apportionment is the single most impactful determination that we as qualified medical evaluators are called upon to make. Now, that may seem to be a little bit counterintuitive, especially when you're dealing with low impairment values, such as 5% whole person impairment, 10% whole person impairment. But I can tell you, I've been to many seminars and many lectures where the main topic of discussion has revolved around apportionment and the importance of apportionment in the dollar value determination of issues at the completion and closure and resolution of these cases. And I'm sure that you can imagine, as the impairment or disability values get higher and higher, the accurate apportionment of that disability becomes more and more critical. So as far as the parties are concerned, apportionment is the single most impactful determination that we as qualified medical evaluators are called upon to make. And you probably can sense this intuitively by the tenacity with which the parties persist in asking us, whether it be in supplemental report or in deposition, to clarify and develop our apportionment arguments in the body of our reports, because it is the single most impactful determination that we as medical evaluators are called upon to render. So let's go over some general principles that we're going to rely on through the course of our next hour of discussions regarding apportionment, at least for the purposes of today's discussion. So first of all, let's define apportionment. And this is right out of Webster's dictionary. This is not a legal definition in California workers' compensation. This is just straight out of Webster's dictionary. Webster's tells us that apportionment is to divide and share out according to a plan, to make a proportionate distribution of something. And in this case, we're talking about an apportionment distribution of costs. We're going to tell the parties what percent of the final costs associated with this claim are to be borne, number one, by the employer, and then number two, which percentage or what portion of the costs are going to be borne by the employee or the examinee or the injured worker, however you want to refer to that person. So it involves a proportionate distribution for our purposes, proportionate distribution of costs. Okay? Now, the approach that we need to consider as qualified medical evaluators in providing our apportionment determination is to look at the current disability. And for our purposes as qualified medical evaluators, we're looking at impairment. So for the purposes of our apportionment determination, the words impairment and disability can be thought of as synonymous and interchangeable terms. So we look at the current impairment and we parcel out its causative sources, the causes of that impairment, whether that cause be non-industrial, whether it be due to a prior industrial injury, what is the percentage that needs to be parceled to the current industrial injury, and all these various causes, and this is not a complete list, and decide the amount directly caused by the current industrial source, and then therefore the percent caused by other sources, which are referred to as other factors. So as we're going to see, this approach requires a thorough consideration of, and not a disregard for, past injuries, and specifically we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about the role of past industrial injuries in the apportionment determination. Okay, so the various causes, we as qualified medical evaluators are called upon to tell the parties of the current impairment what are the causes of that current impairment. And then the parties take our determination of the causes and they allocate various percentages that tell them how to distribute and make a proportionate distribution of the costs of that impairment or of that disability. Now, it's important for us to understand that apportionment is applied to the final adjusted rating of permanent disability, the final adjusted rating, not the standard rating. So remember, the standard rating is the impairment rating that we as qualified medical evaluators provide. And then down at the disability evaluation unit, the raters take our standard rating, they adjust that rating for age and occupation to come up with the final adjusted rating of permanent disability. And it's at this level, at the permanent disability rating level, that our apportionment approximate percentages are applied. Now, very importantly, our apportionment determination is applied to each body part rating string as appropriate and not to an overall rating of disability after the disability of all the body parts is then combined. So this is very, very interesting and very, very fascinating, and it gives us great direction as to how to go about constructing our own apportionment argument within the body of our report. What we need to do is we need to provide an apportionment argument for each body part that's involved in the industrial injury. And as we're going to see as we delve into this even deeper, we need to provide an apportionment determination for each impairment of each body part involved in the injury. So for example, if we're dealing with a shoulder injury, that shoulder injury may have an impairment due to abnormal motion. It may have an impairment due to shoulder instability. It may have multiple impairments, and those multiple impairments may each have multiple and different contributing causes. So we need to tell the parties of each impairment what are the causes of each impairment of each body part, very, very specifically, so that the parties can then go about their determinations and making a proportionate distribution of the costs associated with that particular disability. Okay, so with those principles established, let's talk a little bit about the history of apportionment over the last 20 to 30 years here in the state of California, so you can see some of the historic events that have brought us to where we are with our apportionment determinations today. So let's talk about some of the historic developments that bring us to where we are today with our apportionment determinations. Well, if you were around back in 2004, 2005, you remember that at the time, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger created what was referred to at the time as workers' compensation reform. That was what was passed through Senate Bill 899, and that became effective April 19, 2004, I don't know if you were around then. I was around then, and I remember that this was a big deal. And the purpose of Senate Bill 899 and the whole workers' compensation reform was to address what was referred to at the time as skyrocketing costs. It was felt that at the time, costs in workers' compensation were skyrocketing. So Senate Bill 899 attempted to address skyrocketing costs in several ways, and let's go over those so that we can see how these goals of Senate Bill 899 bring us to the philosophy of our apportionment determinations today. So goal number one of this Senate bill was to reduce costs. They told us that the legislators aimed to control and reduce the overall costs associated with the workers' compensation system. This bill introduced several measures to achieve this, such as revising the formula used to calculate disability benefits and implementing stricter guidelines for evaluating permanent disabilities, such as number one is introducing the AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairments, and number two, such as reform of our apportionment laws governing the apportionment of such disabilities. Number two, goal of Senate Bill 899 was to promote efficiency by streamlining procedures. Goal number three was to enhance benefits while at the same time balancing the financial burden on employers. And you're going to see how our new apportionment laws address this very issue head on. Finally, goal of Senate Bill 899 was to combat fraud and abuse, and it did this in several ways. The legislators aimed to address concerns regarding fraudulent claims and abuses within the workers' compensation system. It increased penalties for fraudulent activities such as misrepresentation of injuries or engaging in fraudulent billing practices. So this was a comprehensive reform of the system at the time, and part of the reform, a major part of the reform, had to deal with revamping the entire apportionment scheme in the state of California, because prior to the passage of this bill, apportionment was very, very difficult to attain. Most disability awards at the time, we called them disability awards, were unapportioned awards because apportionment was very difficult to attain because of the type of system and the type of language that was required to provide for apportionment of any impairment or disability was very, very difficult. Well, the apportionment reform made apportionment more obvious and made it more likely in each and every case that some portion of the overall impairment or disability could be apportioned out, for which the employer could be relieved of responsibility for that particular percentage of the impairment or disability. So as part of the reform, Labor Code Section 4060 was repealed or deleted. This was our major apportionment regulation at the time. Labor Code 4663 was revised, and then 4664 was a brand new labor code was introduced, and these are now the labor codes that govern the process of apportionment here in the state of California. So let's go into the major points of each of these labor codes so that you have a good understanding of them. So as we go through these labor codes now, I want you to think to yourself, how does these changes in these apportionment labor codes and labor code laws, how do these changes impact the potential end costs of the claim? Remember, the overarching goal of the passage of Senate Bill 899 was to address skyrocketing costs, and these new apportionment laws address that. So I want you to pay particular attention as to how these labor codes go about achieving that end objective. So the first one is 4663, which was rewritten as part of Senate Bill 899. And new Labor Code 4663 tells us that now, in the new era, apportionment of the permanent disability shall be based on causation. Causation, and this is different. Apportionment of the permanent disability used to be based on disability. you could only apportion to disability. In other words, the final permanent disability rating could only be reduced down, could only be apportioned, if it could be proven that the examinee had a pre-existing labor disabling condition. Labor disabling was the critical criteria. So back in the day, we had the philosophy that the employer takes the employee as he finds him or her. And so therefore, we could have an examinee or an employee on the job with a serious medical condition, an amputation, a heart condition, a psychiatric condition. But as long as that condition was not interfering with the ability to work, that condition was not labor disabling, and therefore there was no disability. And therefore, if the employee suffered an on-the-job injury, any resulting disability from that injury was unapportioned. Apportionment was very, very difficult to attain and obtain. But now apportionment is based on causation. It's based on what factors are causing the impairment at the permanent and stationary date. And as we're going to see, the employer is liable only for the portion of the disability that's directly due to the industrial injury. And this is new, and this dramatically slashes the overall cost of the final disability. So Labor Code 4663 tells us that a physician who prepares a report addressing the issue of permanent disability, and we can use the word permanent impairment here, due to an industrial injury, shall address in that report the issue of the causation of the permanent disability. In other words, we're required to tell the parties what are the causes that are contributing to the final disability, and the employer is only going to be responsible for that percentage that's directly due to the industrial injury. And this is new, and this is different, because it used to be that the employer was responsible in almost every single case, was responsible for 100% of the disability. So now that 100% is reduced down only to the percent that's directly due to the industrial injury. Okay? So that's the first major point of 4663. Let's take a look at some of the other points as well. Now, the other important section of Labor Code Section 4663, at least for our purposes of qualified medical evaluators, is Section C. And Section C tells us a couple of important things. It says that in order for a physician's report to be considered complete on the issue of permanent disability, the report must, and this is required by law, the law is Labor Code 4663, the report must include an apportionment determination. So in every single report where you provide a permanent impairment rating, you must then discuss the apportionment of that permanent impairment. So here's how to do it. It gives us the instruction as to how to do it. It says, a physician shall make an apportionment determination by finding number one, what approximate percentage of the permanent disability was caused by the direct result of the injury arising out of and occurring in the course of employment. So this is your percentage number one that you're going to provide within the body of your report, and provide what approximate percentage of the permanent disability was caused by other factors both before the industrial injury, factors subsequent to the industrial injury, including, and this is fascinating because it's written into law, it says including prior industrial injuries. So let's go over a couple of these points one by one. It says here, the first percentage that we are to provide in making our apportionment determination is what percent is the employer responsible for. That's this percent here. This is the percent that the employer is going to buy, is going to pay for, is liable for, is going to pay out for. The second percentage is the percentage that has to be bought or borne or burdened by the employee. This percentage is the percentage that the employee is going to have to eat, is going to have to swallow, is going to have to pay for him or herself. So these two percentages tell us the proportionate distribution of the costs of the final cost of the final disability. Okay, do you get it? Now, important to know that the law allows for approximate percentages. And the reason that the law allows for approximate percentages is because legislators understand that there's no qualified or agreed medical evaluator in the world who can provide exact percentages. To do so would require omniscience or a crystal ball or something similar. So we have some slack and some latitude in being able to provide approximate percentages. Now, it's important that in providing approximate percentages, you use exact numbers for your percentages, meaning I used to, back in the day, I used to provide a range of percentages because the wording is approximate. So I used to say things like, in my opinion, approximately 60 to 70% is due to the industrial injury and approximately 30 to 40% is due to other factors. And I used to provide a range of percentage values. But in providing our approximate percentages, we are required to provide exact numbers, even though those exact numbers are approximations. Now, very, very interesting, on the employee's percentage, this percentage that's due to other factors, included as one of the causes is prior industrial injuries. Now, notice that the law does not say prior auto accident injuries. It does not say prior sports injuries. It does not say prior slip and fall injuries. It does not say prior birth defects, prior pre-existing conditions. It's specific for prior industrial injuries. Now, the reason prior industrial injuries is written into the language of the law is because legislators have long known that some employees are frequent injured employees, and they frequently go through the system. And back in the day, prior to the passage of this particular section of the law, an employee could have a prior industrial injury, could receive a permanent disability award or settlement for that injury, and then could claim a medical rehabilitation from that injury, such that at a later time, with a re-injury to the same area, the employee could receive a brand new settlement, a brand new disability award, as if there was no prior problem whatsoever. And now the legislators and the law requires us to take a hard look at prior industrial injuries, and Labor Code Section 4663 is not the only one. This is also found in Labor Code Section 4664. So let's take a look at 4664. Now, Labor Code Section 4664 has a couple of important passages that we rely on as qualified medical evaluators, and that give us great direction in coming up with our own apportionment arguments within the body of our reports. So again, 4664 reiterates that the employer shall only be liable for the percentage of permanent disability directly caused by the injury, AOE, and COE. And is this fair? Does this make sense? Does this make sense to you that the employer should only be liable for that percentage of the disability that they caused? That seems to make sense to me, and this seems to be the fair apportionment of any resulting disability, it seems to me. Well, I can tell you at the time, employers throughout the state rejoiced at the passage of this particular language within Labor Code Section 4664. Now, the second passage of 4664 that we rely on and that we will use as qualified medical evaluators has to deal with prior industrial injuries. And this is where Labor Code Section 4664 also addresses prior industrial injuries, similar to what 4663 did. It says, If the applicant has received a prior award of permanent disability, it shall be conclusively presumed that the prior permanent disability exists at the time of any later industrial injury. And this is usually the one that we come in to evaluate the examinee for. We evaluate them for the subsequent industrial injury when there is a history of prior industrial injury here. And in this case, this talks about prior industrial injury for which the examinee or the employee has received a permanent disability award. So what it says is that at the time of the subsequent injury here, the employee was already, by law, was damaged goods, because the permanent disability that they had, for which they received an award, it continues to exist and persists into perpetuity, especially at the time of the subsequent industrial injury. So if we're talking here about a back injury, okay, the examinee had a prior award of permanent disability for a back injury. When that employee suffers a subsequent industrial injury to the back was already a bad back, was already a weak back, was already a painful back, was already a back that was contributing to limitations to activities of daily living. Every aspect of the prior permanent disability for which the examinee received a prior award continues to exist and persist. So what does that tell us? How does this reduce costs? This reduces costs by disallowing a brand new disability award as if the examinee had a medically rehabilitated back. In other words, 4664 prohibits a claim of a medical rehabilitation. And we used to encounter these claims all the time. The examinee would tell us, yeah, I had a prior back injury, but after that injury, I lost weight, I changed my diet, I started going to the gym regularly, I stretch regularly, and I rehabilitated my back in this example. And they could claim a medical rehabilitation, but now under Labor Code Section 4664, a medical rehabilitation cannot be claimed. And this is part of the overall effort of Senate Bill 899 to reduce costs in California workers' compensation. So very, very interesting that both Labor Code Section 4663 and 4664 address prior industrial injury. And both of these laws, these codes, allow for apportionment of a prior industrial injury. So you may be asking yourself, well, if 4664 here applies to permanent disability awards, how do we apportion in the case of a compromise and release? Because the law here is specific for a prior award of permanent disability, a specific language. But as we know, about approximately 65% of all cases resolved by way of compromise and release. So how is a compromise and release apportioned? Well, if a permanent disability award is apportioned under 4664, a compromise and release can be, doesn't have to be, but can be apportioned under 4663, which also addresses prior industrial injury. So very, very fascinating that the legislators were very concerned that we as qualified medical evaluators take a hard look at prior industrial injuries. Okay? So those are some of the foundational principles. When it comes time now for you to provide your apportionment approximate percentages, whatever those may be, and to whatever other factors you are considering to apportion to, it's critical that your apportionment argument follow a specific and exacting and precise procedure such that your opinion qualifies as substantial medical evidence and can be used by the parties in proportionately distributing out the percentages of the costs of this claim. So let's talk about what it takes in order for your opinion to constitute substantial medical evidence. So the case that gives us great direction, the modern case that gives us great direction in our apportionment determinations, is the Escobedo case. So I want to share with you some of the principles that were espoused in the Escobedo case that will help us in providing our apportionment opinions. So Escobedo said that in the context of the apportionment determination, so these are some specific recommendations for what you need to do in fashioning your apportionment argument. It says that the physician or the opinion must, number one, it must disclose familiarity with the concepts of apportionment. And trust me, the parties will be able to tell right away if you have familiarity or whether you do not have familiarity with the concepts of apportionment. The medical opinion must describe in exact detail the exact nature of the apportionable disability. And this is so critical for us. This is where it's important for you to describe each and every impairment that you provide for each and every body part within the body of your report. So if you're dealing with a knee that has multiple impairments, perhaps due to a meniscectomy procedure, perhaps due to ligament laxity, perhaps due to abnormal motion, that you describe in exact detail the apportionable impairment that you're talking about. In this case would be meniscectomy, number 1, loss of range of motion, number 2, ligamentous laxity, number 3, and discuss the apportionment of each one of those individually and thoroughly. The medical opinion must set forth the basis for the opinion so that the board, who has to have the responsibility ultimately of resolving these financial matters, can determine whether the physician is properly apportioning under correct legal principles. So one way that you could do this within the body of your report would be to simply say, my basis for this opinion is, and then fill in the blank with your basis or bases. Bases is plural of basis. So the general principles that we get from Escobedo is to, number 1, be very, very clear and explicit and exacting on the nature of the disability of the apportionable disability, and number 2, set forth the basis of your opinion. And if you can do that, if you can do these things, these start to set the foundation for your opinion to qualify as substantial medical evidence. So let's develop this idea of substantial medical evidence and how you can use it in formulating your own apportionment opinion. Now, in case law and throughout history, there are many, many cases that talk about what actually constitutes substantial medical evidence. And we're going to talk about some of those here. And some of these are historic cases going all the way back, as you can see, to 1947, and then bringing us all the way up to current with the Escobedo case. And I just want to share with you some of the teaching principles and take-home messages from each of these cases as relates to the concept of substantial medical evidence and how you can use these citations from these cases in formulating your own apportionment approximate percentages and as substantiating those percentages with substantial medical evidence. So let's take a look at a few of these. Okay, so the first one of these is the Garza case. This is a historic case going way back. And it said in the day that any award, any order, or any decision of the board must be supported by substantial evidence in light of the entire record. What does that mean? What that means is if your opinion does not rise to the level of substantial medical evidence, if it doesn't contain within it the criteria that qualify it as substantial medical evidence, that opinion cannot be used to resolve the issue down at the board. The board must then come back to you, either in the form of a supplemental report or in the form of a deposition request, to have you develop, hone, and craft your opinion and substantiate your opinion, to puff up your opinion to the level that it constitutes substantial medical evidence. In the Cinchy case, they instruct us that an opinion that does not disclose its underlying basis, and remember before we heard from Escobedo that we need to provide our basis for the opinion. Here in Cinchy says, an opinion that does not disclose its underlying basis and gives a bare legal conclusion does not constitute substantial medical evidence. What is a bare legal conclusion as relates to the apportionment section of your report? The bare legal conclusion would be something like the following. In my opinion, 80% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury and 20% is due to other factors, period. That's the bare legal conclusion. So Cinchy tells us that the bare legal conclusion in and of itself, without some disclosure as to the underlying basis for the 80%, without some disclosure as to the underlying basis for the 20%, those percentages cannot be used because the opinion does not qualify as substantial medical evidence. In the West case informed us and instructed us that an expert opinion, such as us, such as medical experts, is no stronger than the facts upon which it is based. So we're starting to get an idea that our opinion must be based on facts. The basis for our legal conclusion, the basis, should be based on facts. So you're going to be called upon to disclose the facts upon which you base your apportionment approximate percentages. Granado tells us that a mere legal conclusion does not form a basis for a finding. So if you're submitting reports where you simply state 80% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury and 20% is due to other factors, this is an opinion that cannot be used to resolve the case. This is an opinion that adds cost and delay to the resolution of the case. And so in today's session, I want to share with you exactly how you can speed these cases through to a resolution by using some of these descriptors and fashioning your own apportionment argument within the body of your report. Now, the next case is the Bassett case. This will be the last case before we talk about the Escobedo case. The Bassett case is very, very fascinating. It tells us that the chief value of an expert's testimony, and in our case, we're talking about ourselves as medical experts, rests upon the material from which yours and my opinion is fashioned, and the reasoning by which we progress from the material to the conclusion, and it does not lie in the mere expression of the conclusion. The mere expression of the conclusion is 80% is due to the industrial injury and 20% is due to other factors. Thus, the opinion of the expert is no better than the reasons upon which it is based. And this is critical. Critical take-home message here is that when you provide your apportionment approximate percentages, whatever they may be, 100-0, 90-10, 80-20, whatever they may be, you then want to tell the parties, my reasons for this conclusion. What conclusion? My conclusion for 80% industrial and my conclusion for 20% non-industrial. My reasons for these conclusions include, and we're going to see that our including reasons should be based on facts and must disclose the basis upon which we arrived at these particular percentages. Okay, so these are some historic cases. The case upon which we rely most greatly now in the modern era is the Escobedo case. So let's see what Escobedo has to say about how to fashion our substantial apportionment approximate percentages. So let's see what the Escobedo case tells us, directs us, informs us, and instructs us as to how to construct our apportionment arguments within the body of our reports such that those arguments constitute substantial medical evidence. Now, the Escobedo case draws a distinction between conclusory opinions and substantial opinions, and the conclusory opinion is the opinion that offers the bare legal conclusion, such as 80% industrial, 20% non-industrial, whereas a substantial opinion offers the conclusion just as a conclusory opinion does. It offers the conclusion, but it then provides the reasons and the basis and the facts that support the opinion. The opinion can only be substantial when it's supported by facts, by reasons, by how and why, explanations, etc. And Escobedo tells us that in order to constitute, number one, in order to constitute substantial medical evidence, a medical opinion must be predicated on reasonable medical probability. So how would you do that? In the body of your report, you would start your opinion by saying, in my opinion, comma, within reasonable medical probability, comma, and then you provide the conclusory portion of your opinion. You would say, in my opinion, within reasonable medical probability, comma, 80% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury, and 20% of the impairment is due to other factors. So there you've predicated your opinion, your conclusion, on reasonable medical probability. Now, reasonable medical probability means that the opinion is 51% or greater likelihood of being correct. So if your opinion is not 51% or greater likelihood of being correct, don't say it and don't use those particular apportionment approximate percentages. And then Escobedo goes on to tell us that a medical opinion is not substantial medical evidence if it's based on, number one, facts no longer germane. And I like to use the word relevant versus the word germane. And we're going to repeat the word relevant in a couple minutes. So let's take a look at this. It says the opinion is not substantial. So therefore, in order to be substantial, the opinion must be based on facts that are germane and that are relevant. So you're going to be using the relevant facts in support of your approximate percentages. An opinion is not substantial medical evidence if it's based on inadequate medical histories or examinations. Therefore, your medical history should be sufficient. Your examinations should support your apportionment approximate percentages. You should have citations from the medical history upon which you can rely in support of your apportionment approximate percentages. You should have findings from the physical examination that you can cite and reference in support of your apportionment approximate percentages. An apportionment opinion is not substantial if it's based on incorrect legal theories, if it's based on surmise, speculation, conjecture, or guess. And finally, this is critical, a medical report is not substantial evidence unless it sets forth the reasoning behind the physician's opinion, not merely his or her conclusions. And so, as I said, the way that you could do this in the body of your report is to say, number one, in my opinion, within reasonable medical probability, 80% of the permanent impairment is due to the industrial injury, and 20% is due to other factors, period. Reasons for this conclusion include, colon, and then you list your reasons, and you list the facts upon which your reasons are based, and you convince the parties that your reasons are based on a good history and on a proper examination. And you convince the parties that you're in no way invoking surmise, speculation, conjecture, or guess. And in this way, you construct, like a carpenter building a building, you construct your opinion so that it constitutes substantial medical evidence. So let's summarize these key points. So here's the key points from the Escobedo decision that we can use in formulating our own apportionment argument within the body of our report. And I refer to this as the winning apportionment formula, and it contains all of the factors that are described in the Escobedo case. Number one, you predicate your opinion on reasonable medical probability. You predicate your opinion upon relevant or germane facts. Now it's interesting, when we talk about relevant facts, what are relevant facts? And what are the facts, or what should be the facts, relevant to? To what should be relevant the facts? The facts should be relevant to what? Well, the facts should be relevant to your percentages. So you're saying in the body of your report, 80% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury and 20% is due to other factors. My reasons for this conclusion include colon, and then you give the facts that support the percentages, the facts that are relevant to your 80% industrial, the facts that are relevant to your 20% not industrial. The facts should be relevant to the approximate percentages that you're citing or quoting. Your apportionment approximate percentages must be based on an adequate history, must be based on an adequate exam, and this raises the issue, what is an adequate exam? Well, in my opinion, an adequate exam is an exam exactly taken out of and fashioned in accordance with the AMA Guides 5th edition. And this is an area where the parties can attack you in deposition, and I would, if I was an angry and upset attorney concerned about accuracy of the apportionment approximate percentages, I would inquire as to how accurate and how adequate was the evaluator's exam, and did the evaluator follow procedures described in the AMA Guides. The opinion must not be speculative, must not involve guess or conjecture, and the opinion must contain how and why reasons. Now, when we say reasons, what reasons? What must we provide reasons for? We must provide reasons for our percentages. It's the percentages that must be explained by reasons. So you do this by saying 80% is due to the industrial injury, 20% is due to other factors. My reasons for this conclusion that 80% is industrial and 20% is non-industrial include colon, and then you list your reasons in support of the 80% and your reasons in support of your 20% non-industrial. So let's take a look at how this would look in the body of your report so that we can make this real, so that we can make this practical, and so that you can get a sense as to how this would look within the body of your report. So let's take a look at a report template that addresses the apportionment opinion. So let's see how this would look in the body of our report. Okay, this is the apportionment section of your report, and you simply begin your apportionment argument by telling the parties, my formulation of the permanent impairment follows. And you tell us here below, first with regards to your particular body part, whatever that may be, shoulder, back, knee, psychiatric injury, brain injury, head injury, whatever. Now here I have listed number one impairment, first apportionable impairment. You may have multiple impairments for the knee. You may have abnormal motion. You may have ligamentous instability. You need to go through this exercise for each and every one of those impairments if those impairments are apportionable. So you tell us here, my first apportionable impairment, my impairment rating is 10% whole person impairment due to abnormal motion is what we're using in this particular example, abnormal motion. Okay? And then once the exact impairment is described here, whatever it may be, if it's gait derangement, if it's abnormal motion, if it's ligamentous instability, whatever, tell us what it is here. And then you're going to go through the apportionment first according to Labor Code Section 4663, and then also later under 4664. These are the two labor codes that govern the apportionment here in the state of California. So let's focus on 4663 first. It tells us that we're going to follow our exact formula as described in the Escobedo case. We say that in my opinion and within reasonable medical probability, 80% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury and 20% is due to other factors. And this becomes the conclusory portion of the argument, of the opinion. Now, with regards to the other factors, you then go on to tell us, okay, in this case, other factors include, and then these are some other factors from the Escobedo case. You can use some of them. You can use the ones that apply. If they don't apply, simply tell us that there are no pre-existing disabilities. If it doesn't apply, you simply fill in the word and go on to the next. If there's any disability caused by the natural progression of a pre-existing disease or condition, you would give us here the details of that condition. If there's asymptomatic prior conditions, if there's pathology, this is here where you would detail the other factors. Now you go on to give us your substantiating reasons. Remember the Bassett case, it said it must provide the reasons. So here you say reasons for this conclusion include, number one, that my opinion is based upon reasonable medical probability. You confirm that for us here. You say my opinion on the above apportionment approximate percentages, 80% industrial, 20% non-industrial, is predicated on reasonable medical probability. The facts relevant to the above apportionment approximate percentages upon which I rely include, and here you give us some of the facts that support your apportionment percentages. You give us the facts that support the 80%. You give us the facts that support the 20%. Now, what facts are relevant to those percentages? Well, there could be some facts related to the mechanism of injury that support your percentages. There could be some facts related to the response to appropriate medical care that support your percentages. There could be some facts regarding pre-existing conditions. There could be some facts regarding prior industrial injury. And this is not a complete list. You can add on to this list as the facts support in your particular case. But here is where you give us the facts and you tell us how those facts are relevant to the apportionment approximate percentages. In other words, the facts must relate to the percentages. They're not just simply facts. They have to be facts that are relevant. You tell us what it is from the history that supports your apportionment approximate percentages. What did you discern from the physical examination that supports your apportionment approximate percentages? You give us your how and why reasoning here as to how I arrived at 80% is because XXX, and you tell us how you came to that number. And also tell us how you arrived at 20% non-industrial is because XXX, and tell us your reasons as to how and why you chose those particular numbers. Confirm for us that there's no speculation involved, and then once you've completed your apportionment argument with regards to Labor Code Section 4663, then you can go on and explore whether or not the examinee has had a prior permanent disability award. If that is the case, then you would complete this section of the report and tell us details of the prior disability award and how that award and how the disability impacts your current apportionment approximate percentages. Again, using how and why reasoning, etc. And then you would repeat the same process with the second impairment. So if we're talking about the knee, this could be an impairment related to now here ligamentous instability, for example. And then you go through the whole process of apportioning out, when applicable, the impairment due to ligamentous instability. If there was another body part, a second body part, you would repeat the same procedure above for any and all impairments associated with that particular body part. And this is how, doctors, this is how you can quickly, easily, and accurately construct your apportionment approximate percentages so that those percentages rise to the level of substantial medical evidence and can be used by the courts to resolve the case and distribute out the financial liability to all of the parties. So doctors, I hope this helps you. This is an exact formula, an exact flow chart, an exact recipe, an exact system, and it's an exact sequence that you can use every single time in those cases that involve a determination by you that your examinee is left with some permanent residual impairment of one or more body parts. You simply go through this flow sheet. You simply go through this flow and you tell the parties, number one, what is the apportionment approximate percentages? You predicate your opinion on reasonable medical probability. Explain to the parties the reasons upon which you base your 80% apportionment approximate percentage, the reasons upon which you base your 20% apportionment approximate percentages, and then you base those reasons on relevant facts, facts from the exam, facts from the history. You confirm to the parties and you confirm to yourself that there's no speculation, no guessing, no surmise, no conjecture involved in any of your opinions. And what you're going to discover, as I've discovered, is that when you stumble upon the correct apportionment approximate percentages, whatever they may be, whether they be 80, 20, 70, 30, 60, 40, 100, 0, whatever they may be, when you stumble on the accurate apportionment approximate percentages, your fingers will fly across the keyboard in completing these sections of your apportionment argument. Your fingers will fly. Now, when you're not on the proper apportionment approximate percentages, you will get stuck. You'll get stuck at various stages along this continuum of substantial medical evidence. For example, if you choose the wrong numbers, you will not be able to state in the body of your report that your opinion is based on reasonable medical probability. If you're totally choosing apportionment numbers out of the air, there's a 51%, or I should say there's a 49% likelihood that those numbers are not going to be accurate. So step number one is to confirm that your opinions are 51% or greater likelihood of being correct. This is the first pass metabolism. This is the first filtration component of substantial medical evidence. If you're at the wrong numbers, your numbers will get stuck in this particular filter. So when you arrive at the correct numbers in your head, your fingers will fly across the keyboard and you'll easily complete these sections in the apportionment section of your report. When you're on the wrong numbers, you'll get stuck and you will not be able to complete your arguments within this section of your report. And the reason that you're not able to complete the argument is because the argument is not true. It's fascinating. Some genius came up with this formula. It was in the Escobedo case where it was elaborated, but really substantial medical evidence has been evolving over decades and centuries. And it's to the point now where the process of crafting your opinions such that they qualify and constitute substantial medical evidence is basically a truth filtration system. As regards to apportionment, only proper percentages that are true will fall out of the bottom of the filtration system. The reason that they fall out at the bottom of the filtration system is because they constitute substantial opinions, and substantial opinions are true, accurate opinions that can then go on to be used by the parties. So doctors, I hope this system helps you. You can rely on this system in each and every case and it will never fail you. It will work for you every single time and your phone will ring off the hook for more evaluations than you can even handle as the parties realize that you understand apportionment and you can solve the difficult riddle of apportionment, and you can bring this plane in for a landing, and the parties can count on you for successful resolution of cases. So doctors, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's session. I look forward to being with you on our next session as we continue in our new series entitled QME Hot Topics and Pop Culture. For now, I want to thank you for your dedication to excellence as a qualified medical evaluator, and I want to thank you for your continued service in the accurate determinations for California's injured workers. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.